will do what Republicans have long said they would not do: drastically raise the deficit and cut Medicaid. In fact, those Medicaid cuts could be even deeper than the widely reported $1.1 trillion. And Senator Thom Tillis, whose resignation was influenced by all this, suggests that Trump is listening to the wrong people.
He's gotten a lot of advice from people who have never governed, and all they've done is written white papers. And it's very different to talk about the perfect versus implement the practical. I've disagreed with bad advice he's been given. And I think if every once in a while he would tap on people who genuinely want him to be the most successful president in the history of this country, then he could benefit from it. And if he doesn't, he does it at his own peril, and he can have people from an ivory tower drive him into a box canyon.
But are others driving Trump into a box canyon, or is he? Is he getting bad advice, or does he view the devastating impact many Republicans tell him will hit millions of Americans as a kind of tough love? The ends justify the means. Joining us now is Michael Steele, co-host of MSNBC's The Weekend and former chair of the Republican National Committee. Julie Roginski is a Democratic strategist and author of the Salty Politics newsletter on Substack. So, Michael, what do you think is going on here? Is the president supporting this bill because he genuinely, truly believes in it? Because he's not worried about its impact? What do you see happening?
To be honest, I don't think the president could recount any feature or aspect of this bill if you were to sit down with him and talk through what was actually in the bill. And that's a level of detail this president is never noted to be involved with. So I think Senator Tillis is right that, you know, the president's the guy who listens to the advice from the last person in the room. And it matters who's in that room. And if a Senator Tillis or others, Don Bacon or others, are not in that room, then the president doesn't know what the true ramifications of this are going to be. That it will have a direct impact on his legacy, not in terms of when he leaves office, but within the next year, as Republicans get ready for the midterm elections, which is why you're seeing, you know, the likes of a Don Bacon and others say, you know what, I'm just not going to stay around for another round of this because it doesn't get pretty after this. So I don't think the president is tuned into that. I don't think he's ever really been tuned into that, because that's a concern about others than himself. And so unless you can express it to him in ways that he can see the impact on him, I don't think he really cares what's in that bill. Because if he did, then the Senate wouldn't be in the position it's in. The House would not have produced the bill that they did in the first place. And we'd be in a very different space of conversation right now.
Well, Julie, Senator Elizabeth Warren has her own theory about what's motivating Republicans generally. Here's what she said.
I actually don't think that my Republican colleagues have lost their hearts. They have lost their spines. It seems that all they can do now is bow down to Donald Trump and his billionaire donors. They will bow down, even if it means hurting families, community hospitals, and nursing homes in their own states.
Here's another possibility. Let me ask you what you think about it, that Republicans are not going to stop Donald Trump because they believe what he has repeatedly said, which is, the voters gave me a mandate to do this.
Well, I don't really think it matters why they're doing this. What matters is what they're doing. And what they're doing is cutting health care from about 12 million Americans in the next several years. They're shutting down rural hospitals. They're getting rid of the social safety net. They're ballooning the deficit to the point that will imperil Medicare and Social Security, and so on. They're getting rid of food assistance. They're getting rid of every single aspect of the safety net and the social net that Donald Trump promised to keep. And don't forget, he promised that he would not touch Medicaid, and he would promise he wouldn't touch Medicare, and he's touching both of those.
Do you think he doesn't know what's happening in this bill?
Why do we keep treating him like a moron who can't read, right? Does he not watch TV? He could maybe turn off Fox News, which is feeding him propaganda that they want him to hear, and maybe crack open this bill, or crack open the New York Times, or crack open some non-propaganda outlet that will tell him what's in this bill. I mean, we got to treat him like an adult and stop treating him like a child. And we have to stop thinking about what the motivation is of all of these Republican senators, whether it's fear of Trump or it's that they really care about nobody other than the billionaires to whom they're giving massive windfalls at the expense of their own constituents. They know what they're doing. And they're doing it affirmatively, and they'll be held accountable, as Michael said, next November, as they should be when you have every healthcare system in Louisiana begging and pleading with the speaker not to pass this bill. When
Red state.
Right, red state. When they're pleading with their own senator, Senator Cassidy, not to pass this bill because it will decimate healthcare for their own constituents, and they continue to do this, they know what they're doing, and we have to stop thinking about their motivations and look at their actions.
So, Michael, there is so much confidence in the power of Trump and the Trump name. His son Eric's interview with the Financial Times ignited talk of a potential Trump dynasty. Now, here's part of what Eric said. I think the political path would be an easy one. I think I could do it. And by the way, I think other members of our family could do it, too. He also said he's wholly unimpressed by half the politicians I see. I could do it very effectively. Eric sure seems to think there's a path for a Trump dynasty. Is Donald Trump not the end of the line?
No, he doesn't have to be. You know, if Americans are drunk on stupid, yeah, Eric Trump is your next president. Put that one in your pipe and smoke it. That's not some good ganja, let me tell you.
Well, maybe Laura Trump as a U.S. senator in North Carolina.
Sure. Why not? Why not? You know, let's expand the grift. Let's widen the opportunity. Look, this is all unserious stuff. I think what Julie laid out, though, is the important piece. The impact that this is going to have on real people rests solely in one spot right now. It's on the members of my party, the Republican Party, that have agreed to cut programs that they told the American people they would not cut, to expand the reach and the depth and breadth of dollars to the benefit of those who are far wealthier than those red districts that they represent. And they will have to now look those voters in the eye, and they'll either continue to lie to them and the voters will buy it, or they won't, and they'll unelect them. That's the politics of this. And their calculation is Americans will, by next November, look past all of this, because there's a culture warrior that they want, a war issue they want to get behind, just as they did in the last election when, you know, they were warned about all these bad things happening with the gay and lesbian community. And then they tacked on, oh, but the price of eggs. And people were like, okay, yeah, well, if we, again, want to stay stuck on stupid, then this is the future. Eric Trump just laid it out because he thinks he's smarter and better than anyone else in politics right now. And damn it, you know what? He may just be right, given the way Senate Republicans and House Republicans are behaving.
Such a tremendous level of confidence, Julie. And when you look at the future, and none of us knows what it holds. We don't even know what the next 24 hours holds. But any belief, I think, in a Trump dynasty hinges on the idea that the power of that name is transferable. The opposite argument is that Donald Trump is a once-in-a-lifetime politician. Is there MAGA? Is there power without him?
Look, if he puts his hand on Eric Trump's shoulder and says, this is my anointed heir, then I think, as Michael pointed out, there are enough Republicans out there that will clear the path for Eric Trump. They'll clear the path for anything Donald Trump wants, as we see today and as we've seen consistently. But I would also have to venture to say that by the time Eric Trump runs, if we still have free and fair elections in this country, as we've had in the past, I don't know that there's going to be an appetite for more of this. What Trump is doing this time around in this cycle is so much worse than what he was doing the first term. So much more callous, so much more cruel to not just to Democrats or inner city folks who didn't vote for him, but to his own constituents. I mean, this bill hurts his own base more than it hurts anybody else. And eventually, if they, as Michael pointed out, stop smoking whatever's in their pipe and look at their lives and look at the fact that their rural hospitals have shut down because of Donald Trump. They can't go to a doctor because of Donald Trump. They have no assistance for food or anything else they need because of Donald Trump. The price of eggs keeps going up because of Donald Trump. The price of everything keeps going up because of Trump's tariffs, because of Donald Trump. At some point, you have to say that even they will realize they cannot continue to vote against their own interests. I hope. If that's not the case, then we're in deeper trouble in this country than any of us thinks.
Michael Steele, Julie Roginski, thank you both. Michael Steele, you can catch him on the weeknight along with Alicia Menendez and Simone.